The first smirk came before Joel Ashford had even set down his coffee on the lobby counter. It belonged to a man in a fitted gray suit who glanced up from his phone, looked Joel over once. The worn messenger bag, the slightly too old dress shoes, the way Joel's collar sat a half-inch off center because his 7-year-old son Benji had tried to fix it that morning, and then looked back at his phone as if the visual had confirmed something he already suspected. Joel noticed. He always noticed things like that. He set his visitor badge request form on the counter anyway, and kept his breathing even. The lobby of Meridian Capital Partners occupied the entire ground floor of a glass tower in downtown Chicago. The kind of building designed to make you feel small before you reach the elevator. Marble floors, 15-foot ceilings, a reception desk carved from a single slab of pale stone. 14 other men sat or stood in various states of practiced confidence along the waiting area. Some wore the kind of suits that cost what Joel made in a month back when he was still working regularly. Former investment bankers, hedge fund consultants, one man who had his credentials printed on embossed cardstock and kept sliding them toward anyone who made eye contact. Joel had printed his resume on regular paper. Benji had colored a small blue rocket ship in the bottom corner of the back page that morning while Joel was answering emails, and Joel had only noticed it after leaving the apartment. He did not turn back to reprint it. The position posted was Director of Risk Intelligence, an internal role at Meridian overseeing a newly created division meant to identify fraudulent fund activity before regulatory exposure. The kind of job that required an unusual combination of analytical precision and field instinct that most candidates either fully had or convincingly performed. Meridian's founder, Sylvester Crane, had opened one unexpected slot at the end of a competitive process after his original hire had withdrawn under undisclosed circumstances. Word in certain circles was that the firm had received an anonymous tip recommending one specific name for the final consideration round. Joel had received no such tip. He had applied through the standard portal 3 weeks earlier after his daughter, his son Benji, who approached every problem with terrifying practicality for a second grader, had found the posting online while Joel was on hold with the health insurance company and said, simply, "Dad, it says they want someone who finds things other people miss. That's literally what you do." Joel had looked at the posting, recognized the firm name from work he had done years ago, and spent 4 days deciding whether to submit. He submitted on a Thursday night after Benji fell asleep, sitting at the kitchen table with the radio on low. Now the man in the gray suit set his phone face down and looked at Joel again with the careful assessment of someone calculating odds. His name tag from the receptionist read Gareth. His posture announced that he already knew what the outcome of today would be and had only arrived to make it official. "Freelance background?" Gareth asked, not to Joel specifically, but loud enough that the sentence landed where intended. Joel looked up. "Contract intelligence work. 7 years contract." Gareth let the words sit there a moment. "So, no institutional affiliation, not currently." Someone nearby made a sound that was not quite a laugh but performed the same function. Gareth tilted his head. "What's the longest you've held a single position?" Joel met the question without flinching, long enough to know when someone's asking to learn versus asking to diminish. The room did not go silent, but the texture of the air in it changed. 2 men near the window exchanged a look. Gareth's mouth moved towards something sharper, but before he found it, the elevator doors opened and a tall woman in her mid-50s stepped out with the deliberate efficiency of someone who ran meetings by existing in the room. Margaret Crane did not run Meridian Capital. Her brother Sylvester did, but she had built the firm's internal compliance architecture from 12 employees to over 300. And anyone who had worked in financial intelligence for more than 5 years knew that the real operational brain of Meridian had never been the name on the building. She held a slim portfolio and looked across the waiting room with eyes that did not settle on anything casually. They settled on Joel, not on Gareth, who had positioned himself near the front with the practiced visibility of a man who had spent years being looked at first. Not on the embossed cardstock by the far window. On Joel, who was standing slightly off to one side near the building directory, because he had spent the previous 4 minutes mapping the lobby's camera coverage, identifying which angle from the security desk had a delayed rotation sweep, and noting that the fire exit behind the reception alcove had a magnetic lock that was not currently engaged, which meant the building's secondary power relay was running behind schedule on its morning diagnostic cycle. He had not done any of this consciously. It was simply how he saw rooms. Margaret crossed toward the desk. One of the candidates stepped forward with cardstock ready. She moved past him with a polite nod and stopped near Joel. "You're the last name on the roster," she said. "Yes. You applied through the standard channel." "Yes." She studied him for a moment. Not unkindly. More like a person reading a document they did not expect to find interesting and discovering they were wrong. My brother approved your inclusion after an anonymous submission was cross-referenced to your application. She paused. I want you to know I don't love unexplained variables. Joel looked at her steadily. That's a good instinct for someone running compliance. Something shifted in her expression, not warmth exactly, more like an adjustment of category. Room 4, she said. 15 minutes. Gareth watched the exchange from 8 feet away with an expression that had collapsed into something less comfortable than a smirk. Room 4 was a glass-walled assessment chamber on the second floor. No conference table. Just a standing problem board, a workstation, and 2 seated evaluators. Both senior partners, both wearing the particular stillness of people who had stopped being impressed by things years ago and were waiting to see if today would change that. They ran 7 candidates through before Joel. Standard Meridian intake, a live case file with a simulated fund irregularity, 1 hour to present findings and methodology. 6 of the 7 presentations went smoothly, Gareth's went best. He spoke with the rhythm of someone who had rehearsed the performance of competence long enough that it had become indistinguishable from the thing itself. The evaluators nodded at the right moments. He thanked them on the way out with a handshake that lasted exactly long enough. Joel entered at 11:15. He looked at the case file for 4 minutes without touching the workstation. One evaluator shifted. The other glanced at the clock. Joel finally pulled the chair out and sat down. The irregularity isn't in the fund performance data, he said. It's in the redemption timing windows. He opened the file and pointed to 3 clustered withdrawal events across an 18-month period. These look like normal institutional redemptions, but the processing intervals between request and execution are exactly 1 business day shorter than Meridian's disclosed policy. Every time, that precision is the flag. He looked at the evaluators. The easiest fraud to miss is the kind that almost follows the rules. Silence. The first evaluator leaned slightly forward. The second one picked up a pen. By 11:47, the presentation had not ended. It had become a conversation. Joel walked through the embedded audit trail in the simulated file, identified 2 secondary anomalies the case design had apparently included as decoys, and then, because he had noticed a third element no one had commented on, explained why the transaction velocity pattern matched a specific laundering technique that had appeared in a 2019 federal enforcement action that most analysts had stopped reading about because it had settled quietly. One evaluator said that case was sealed. Joel said the settlement was. The methodology summary was published in a compliance journal with a 600 subscriber list. A pause. You read a compliance journal with 600 subscribers. I read several. The second evaluator looked at the first one and did not say anything. The first one looked at Joel and did not say anything either, but the way they both stopped saying anything communicated something clearly. Joel's phone vibrated. He saw the screen, Benji's school. He silenced it. The evaluators noticed, neither commented. 15 minutes later, when he walked out of room 4 and back into the hallway, his phone vibrated again. He picked up this time, stepping toward the window at the end of the corridor. Mr. Ashford. The school secretary. Benji's fine, I want to say that first, but he's asking if he can go to the library during dismissal instead of the pickup area, and we need a verbal confirmation from a parent. Library is fine, Joel said. I may be running a few minutes late. He said to tell you, and I'm quoting, tell him good luck even though he doesn't need it because he already knows more than everyone else in the building. Joel looked at the glass wall, at the pale winter light coming through it. Tell him I'm working on it, he said. He ended the call and turned back toward the hallway just as the alarm went off. Not a fire alarm, the tone was wrong. 3 short pulses, then silence, then 3 more. Internal security protocol. Joel recognized it in the same half-second he registered that the hallway cameras had all tilted 2 degrees off their usual sweep angle, which was not a malfunction, because malfunction didn't affect multiple units simultaneously with the same offset. Someone had adjusted them. Margaret Crane appeared at the far end of the hallway moving fast, 2 staff members behind her, and the expression on her face was the particular kind of control that required real effort to maintain. She saw Joel standing by the window and stopped. Assessment is suspended, she said. I know. He nodded toward the cameras. Your building security sweep on this floor has been manually redirected, all 3 visible units. He looked at the corridor junction behind her. Which means whoever triggered this alarm knew the camera pattern well enough to adjust it first. Margaret looked at him for a half-second. You've been on this floor for 22 minutes. The office layout is visible from the elevator approach. The camera placement is standard for the build type. He paused. The person who adjusted them did it from inside, staff-level access. One of the staff members behind her started to object. Margaret raised a hand and he stopped. "My brother is in the executive suite," she said. "Sixth floor, has he been reached?" She looked at her phone. No response. Joel was already moving. The stairwell was faster than the elevator and less predictable. He took it two at a time, not running. Running drew attention and cost breath, but moving with the economy of someone who had done this in harder places than a Chicago high-rise. Third floor landing. A building maintenance worker stood near the door, looking confused and frightened in a way that was genuine, not performed. Joel passed him without stopping. Fourth floor. He heard voices from the corridor beyond the door, not panicked, controlled, the distinct cadence of people moving with a plan, not reacting to one. He paused on the landing and listened for 3 seconds. Two people, one giving direction, one confirming. Short sentences. The kind of communication that came from training, not instinct. He entered on the 5th floor instead, crossed through a half-empty operations room, where two analysts sat frozen at their desks, looking at each other with expressions of complete uncertainty, went through the connecting corridor that the building schematic near the elevator had shown him, and came at the 6th floor executive suite from the interior wing rather than the main approach. The assistant at the exterior desk was gone. Her computer was still on. A coffee cup sat half full beside the keyboard, still warm when Joel pressed the back of his hand against it quickly as he passed. 2 minutes, maybe less, since she had been moved. Sylvester Crane's office door was closed. The light inside the frosted glass was on. 2 shadows moved in it. Joel did not go through the door. He went to the supply room 12 feet to the left, which shared a ventilation panel with the executive office. Because buildings built in the 90s used shared duct systems between executive suites and adjacent support spaces to cut HVAC costs. And the fact that this building was built in 1997 was printed on the placard next to the lobby directory. He removed the panel with his palm rather than his keys, minimizing noise, set it on the carpet, and listened. One voice was clipped, professional, and communicating instructions into what sounded like an earpiece. The second voice was Sylvester Crane, older, precise, with the particular tension of someone refusing to show fear to people who wanted them afraid. "The access codes aren't held by an individual," Sylvester said. "You understand that the architecture—" "We're not here for codes," the first voice said. Joel processed that. Not codes. Not a standard corporate extraction. They were not after information they needed Sylvester to provide. They were after Sylvester himself, or something they expected to find already staged in this office, and they had brought Sylvester in, under the pressure of physical presence alone. He looked at the ventilation space, calculated angles, and made a decision. He put the panel back. Then he walked to the office door and knocked twice, a beat of silence. "Mr. Crane," Joel said through the door, "Meridian Compliance is conducting an unannounced floor security audit. I need you to press the desk verification code in the next 30 seconds or we initiate external lockdown." Another beat longer. The voice inside said something low and fast. Joel turned the handle. The door was unlocked, good, because a lock would have complicated the next 10 seconds significantly, and he moved inside with the particular kind of entrance that communicated neither aggression nor retreat, just presence. 2 men, both standing. One near Sylvester's desk, one near the window. Neither in Meridian uniforms. The window man's jacket hung wrong on his right side, which meant the weight there was not a phone. Sylvester Crane sat in his chair with the practiced stillness of a man who had decided to appear calmer than he felt. Joel looked at neither intruder directly. He looked at the space between them. "Sir," he said to Sylvester without urgency, "the audit team needs your confirmation downstairs." Sylvester looked at him. A half-second of recalibration. This man was not Meridian staff, not someone Sylvester had seen before, and then something in Sylvester's eyes shifted. The particular shift of a person choosing to trust a stranger because the alternative was worse. "Of course," Sylvester said and began to rise. The desk man moved first. Joel had expected that. He was closer and more aggressive, which meant he was the less trained of the two, which meant his movement would be faster and sloppier. It was. Joel redirected the grab at his collar into a wrist rotation that transferred the man's forward momentum into the floor, in a motion that was over before the sound of impact caught up with it. The window man reached inside his jacket. Joel crossed the room in 2 steps, trapped the arm before the draw-cleared fabric, and drove the man's elbow up against the window frame with enough pressure to produce a very specific and persuasive sound. The man made a short, involuntary noise and went still. Joel took the weapon from the jacket with 2 fingers, engaged the safety, and set it on Sylvester's desk. The entire sequence had taken 8 seconds. Sylvester Crane sat very still, looking at Joel the way people sometimes looked at things they had no immediate category for. "Who are you?" Sylvester said. It was not quite a question. It was the sentence of someone who had already understood that the answer would be complicated. Joel Ashford. He kept his eyes on both men, who were now in the specific state of stillness that came from having tried something and failed physically. I applied for the director position. I was in room 4 this morning. Sylvester looked at the man on the floor, at the one against the window, at the weapon on his desk. You passed the assessment, Sylvester said. I don't know that yet. His phone vibrated. He glanced down. Benji's school again. Third call. Joel kept his eyes on the intruders and answered, Dad. Benji unhurried, the way children were unhurried when they had already decided everything was fine, Ms. Pryor says I can stay at the library until 5, but she wanted me to ask you because the sign-out form has a space for confirmation. Library is confirmed, Joel said. I'll be there before 5. You sound like your working voice. Joel exhaled once through his nose. I'm at the interview. Are you winning? He looked at Sylvester, at the secured intruders, at the window behind them where the Chicago skyline sat gray and unbothered by the entire morning. Still in progress. Okay, Benji lowered his voice with the gravity of someone sharing tactical advice. Don't let them see you check the time. It makes you look nervous. Joel almost said something. He didn't. I'll pick you up at 4:30, he said. The line ended. Sylvester was watching him with an expression that had moved from recalibration to something more careful. Your son? 7. He gives interview advice? Among other things. Margaret arrived 4 minutes later with 2 of Meridian's contracted building security officers and a look on her face that suggested she had spent those 4 minutes moving quickly and thinking faster. She stopped in the doorway and took in the scene with a rapid inventory of a person who processed unusual information for a living. Sylvester, I'm fine, he gestured at Joel. This one came through the supply room. Margaret looked at the ventilation panel, at the man on the floor, at the weapon on the desk, and then at Joel. The supply room, she said. Shared HVAC with the executive suite. Building's original 1997 construction. The lobby directory has the completion date. She stared at him for a moment. You read the lobby directory. I read everything in the room I'm standing in. She turned to the security officers and began issuing instructions. While she did, Sylvester stood from his chair, straightened his jacket with the automatic dignity of a man reclaiming composure after choosing not to lose it, and walked to the window where he stood looking out for a moment before speaking. The anonymous submission, he said without turning. The one that flagged your name to our process, Joel waited. It came from a dormant compliance email archived, flagged by our system as originating from a contractor account inactive since 2016. Sylvester finally turned. The name on that account was Claire Ashford. The name landed differently than the rest of the morning had. Joel did not move for a moment. Claire, his wife, who had worked a federal compliance audit subcontract in 2015 and 2016, before the accident, who had filed 3 separate internal memos about a fund irregularity she found during that engagement, memos that had been dismissed, deprioritized, and eventually buried under a corporate reorganization that coincided with the departure of 2 senior partners, who had died in February 2017 when their car was struck on an icy overpass on a Tuesday night, while Benji was still small enough to be carried. Joel had never fully understood the accident. He had never been given a reason to question it either. He had simply learned to exist in the shape left behind. Her account was reactivated 3 days ago, Margaret said from behind him, her voice quieter now. Internal system. Someone with archived admin access used her credentials to submit your name into our process. Joel exhaled slowly. Did you trace the access? Working on it. She hesitated. But the access log shows a terminal on the 7th floor. Executive operations. Sylvester said nothing, but his jaw moved once. Joel looked at them both. Who has executive operations access on the 7th floor? Neither of them answered immediately, which was itself an answer. Tell me it's not someone still in this building, Joel said. Margaret's tablet lit up. She looked at it. Her face changed. 7th floor badge is still active, she said. Someone is accessing archive files right now. Executive operations suite. Joel was already at the door. The 7th floor was quieter than the floors below it, the deliberate quiet of expensive carpet and sound-dampening wall panels, and the kind of institutional calm that large sums of money tended to create around themselves. Joel moved through it with the awareness of a person who had learned that quiet spaces in unstable situations were not safe. They were waiting. The executive operations suite was at the north end of the floor. The door was ajar. Inside, a man in his early 60s sat at a terminal, hands moving fast, the specific efficiency of someone erasing rather than searching. Leonard Voss, Chief Operating Officer, per the door placard, a Meridian founder-era figure who had been with Sylvester since before the firm had more than a dozen employees. The kind of institutional presence who was so embedded in the organization's daily function that his name appeared on no meaningful external-facing documents, but on nearly every internal approval chain. He did not hear Joel enter. He was too focused on the terminal. Joel stopped 3 feet inside the door and said nothing. He watched what Leonard was deleting. Fund transfer records. Specifically records from a 2016 compliance audit. Specifically records that corresponded to the window when Claire had been conducting her subcontract review. Leonard finally registered the presence behind him and turned. He did not perform surprise. He looked at Joel with the flat recognition of someone who had already known this moment was a possibility and had simply hoped it would not arrive today. "You found the files," Leonard said. "You left the door open," Joel said. Leonard looked at the terminal, at Joel, at the door. "You don't understand what those records represent," Leonard said, and his voice carried the particular exhaustion of someone who had spent years converting understanding into justification. "They represent what Claire found in 2016, Joel said, and what you buried." Leonard was quiet for a moment. The fund structure she flagged was a liability instrument that 2 of our largest institutional partners had already committed to. Unwinding it would have created regulatory exposure that. He stopped. Something in Joel's expression had ended whatever careful architecture the explanation had been building toward. "I'm not here for the explanation," Joel said. Leonard looked at him for a long time. Then, quietly, "The accident report was never reviewed for inconsistency because the original traffic analysis was submitted by a third party contracted through one of our settlement-adjacent vendors." The sentence arrived without drama. That was the worst part of it. It arrived the way institutional damage always arrived, stated plainly, buried in process language, made small by its own precision. Joel stood very still. The thing about grief that people who had not lived in it did not understand was that it did not erupt, it did not announce itself. It returned, after years of quiet, by finding the exact shape of the space where it had always been waiting, and filling it again completely and without apology. He breathed through it. "The vendor," he said. His voice was steady. He made it stay that way. Leonard looked like a man deciding whether the truth would function as mercy or acceleration and finding he had lost the ability to choose. "I didn't know what they would do. I flagged the risk upward. What happened after? Who did you flag it to?" The door behind Joel opened. Sylvester Crane walked in. Margaret behind him. 2 security officers behind her. Sylvester looked at Leonard. Leonard looked at Sylvester. The look between them was the particular look of 2 people who shared a long history and had just reached the end of what that history could protect. Leonard looked down at his hands. "There's a secondary partition," Leonard said, to no one specifically. "Archive drive 2016 through 2017. Everything Claire submitted. Everything I should have acted on." He paused. "I've been carrying it for 7 years. I didn't know how to." He stopped. "There's no version of this sentence that ends correctly," Sylvester said very quietly. "No, there isn't." Margaret was already on her phone, calling legal and compliance simultaneously with the practiced efficiency of someone who had run response protocols before, who would run them again, who did not stop running them just because the situation was also devastating. Security escorted Leonard from the room. Sylvester stayed. So did Margaret. The 3 of them stood in the executive operations suite for a moment in the particular silence that followed the collapse of something that had been held together by the simple pressure of not being looked at. Sylvester looked at Joel. "I didn't know about the accident." Joel believed him. Not because it was convenient, because the specific way Sylvester said it contained the weight of someone who had just learned something irrevocable. "The firm carried liability it should have disclosed," Sylvester said. "Depending on what that partition contains, it'll be significant," Joel said. Sylvester nodded slowly. "Yes." He paused. "For what it's worth." "It's not worth anything right now," Joel said, not unkindly, but without the softening that the sentence might otherwise have received. "Ask me again in 6 months." Sylvester accepted that with the grace of a man who understood he had no standing to ask for faster. Joel's phone vibrated. He looked at the screen, not the school. Benji's number, his son had an old phone with 1 contact in it, for exactly these situations, he answered. "Dad, Benji, quieter than before. It's 4:28. I know you said 4:30, but I just wanted to. I'm coming now," Joel said. "Was it hard?" Joel looked at the empty terminal. The deleted files Leonard would have to reconstruct under subpoena. The window with its unremarkable view of the city's northwest face, gray-skied, ordinary, indifferent to everything the morning had been. "Yes," he said. Benji was quiet for a moment. Then, Mom used to say that the days that feel like too much are usually the ones that meant something. Joel closed his eyes. For a moment, he was in a kitchen on a Tuesday morning 7 years ago, Claire standing at the counter with her laptop open, frowning at a spreadsheet and saying the same thing she always said when she found something wrong inside a system designed to look right. Somebody buried this on purpose. He had not known then what that meant. He had not known it would matter. He had not known she was right in a way that would take 7 years to surface. She was right, Joel said. I know, Benji said. She was right about most stuff. Except about zucchini. Zucchini is still bad. Joel exhaled once, and for the second time that morning, his mouth almost became a smile. I'll be there in 12 minutes, he said. He put the phone in his pocket and turned toward the door. Margaret was standing near it, watching him with the careful expression of someone measuring what they were looking at against what they thought they had understood. The position is yours if you want it, she said. I'll think about it tonight. She nodded. That's fair. A pause. For what it's worth, your read on the audit case this morning, the redemption timing windows. No one has flagged that methodology in 4 assessment rounds. Joel looked at her. Someone should have been reading the compliance journals. He walked to the elevator, descended 16 floors, crossed a marble lobby that looked exactly the same as it had 2 hours ago, except that everything inside it had been rearranged in ways that the lobby itself would not reflect for months, and stepped out onto the sidewalk into a cold that was clean and ordinary and real. He walked to his car. He drove north to the school library where Benji was waiting in the 3rd aisle from the door. Joel knew this because Benji always chose the 3rd aisle, because it had the best light and was closest to the non-fiction section and farthest from the printer, which Benji had informed Joel was too loud to think near. Benji looked up when Joel appeared at the end of the aisle and registered his father's face with the particular intelligence of a child who had spent years learning to read what adults tried to keep off their expressions. You're okay, Benji said. It was not a question. I'm okay. Benji looked at him for one more second, measuring. Then he closed his book and stood up and picked up his backpack, satisfied. Did you get it? Joel put a hand on his son's shoulder and steered him gently toward the exit. I don't know yet, but I found something more important. Benji walked beside him through the library doors and out into the cold air, and he thought about this for half a block the way Benji thought about everything, carefully, from all sides, and then he said, Is it the kind of important that means we still get pizza? Joel looked at the street ahead, at the gray sky, at the ordinary Tuesday afternoon that had agreed improbably to continue. Yeah, he said. It's that kind. They walked to the car together, and the city moved around them the way cities did. Without knowledge, without ceremony, without any awareness of the particular weight 2 people could carry between them and still keep walking.